This is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial.
Indeed.
And we're privileged to have a guest today that's a follow-up from last week about the old hickory tree on Kohler and High. So we'll get back to that. It's been a busy week. We've had several people who have had basements or burst pipe situations. The people who are plumbers that work with this sort of situation are faced with a lot of people who have pipes against walls that can't handle cold. And I want to remind you that a whole lot of you are into things like using less water. Well, if you are in an old situation where the pipes needed a lot of water, then if you put a brick in your toilet reservoir so that you use less water, or you in other ways economize on water, you might not succeed because the system that you're in is used to lots and lots of water flowing. So if you drop your water content really low, then you can have a freeze and the sludge doesn't move quite so fast. So then you have a backup. So then you have to have a router rooter. And then if the router rooter doesn't work, you have to have a water system that does like 400 pounds per square inch and forces the blockage out. So just be careful when you modernize your house if you're in an old territory. Even if you're in a new territory and the system requires more water, then be careful that although you're doing good, you might not succeed. So that's my reminder there. I also want to say something about Kristen John. She's put up a pollinator field trip we do annually in Meadowbrook Park, and she's on Facebook, and she's put it up to YouTube, and you probably have to call me to get the details of that, because my friendly computer expertise did not print the details in black because I don't print blue. so I don't have it in front of me. I do have Kristen's address here. Let me have a look. It's yes. Oh, you can get it. It's you go to Prairie Plant Walk with Dave Monk, and it's got a number. Wow, 143460365. I'll repeat that: 143460365. You can give me a call at 840-1911 for information. And she did that videotaping at very short notice, and she also photographed Alex Wilde giving a very excellent photography workshop, and we haven't quite finished whether we're putting that up and where, but these sorts of things are tremendously helpful. Liz Rudnick has just finished a website on the 9 acres we have at north of Rantoul, and that's very informative too. So a lot of these things we can't do ourselves. We have to depend on you folk doing that, and we appreciate it. So I think that's enough for now. Let's go to Mike. Mike came in. He's got a Prairie Prairie T-shirt on, Preserve Prairie, and it's got coneflowers on it. And those coneflowers were harvested recently by 50 students. The voluntary Illini projects took a busload of students up to Rantoul, and we harvested liatris and purple coneflower. That particular coneflower I photographed in high contrast on my belly, and I got poison ivy out of that.
Oh, goodness.
So it's a very personalized situation. We haven't done a lot of high contrast silkscreen printing lately, but what we do with that is give you an opportunity to look at something that might be on your backyard or your barn, and so by taking out the details and making it high contrast, you can put your own imagination into it. And it's also a process that it's a process that people could get involved in. Silkscreen printing, you can have 5 or 6 people, one to put the paper in, one to squeegee, one to take the paper out, hang it, somebody else to be a quality control and to shout when something's leaky and it doesn't print properly. So you can have a group of 5 or 6 people that are really enjoying print making. So it's a process that has helped us distribute our work. And we might even do that with Mike if you have some pictures that work that way. It's become possible to do that with a computer anymore.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah. So Mike is the Urbana arborist. I don't know whether that's the right term. Is that the right term for it?
My actual title is Urbana City Arborist.
Yes. And you got there because it was community concern about trees and...
Our meeting on Thursday, our tree commission meeting.
No, I'm talking about your hire in the first place.
Oh, well, sure. I'm the third. Let's see. I am the 4th city arborist. The program started back in 1975, and it was due to citizen concern about the community trees. That's exactly right. And Bruno Shields was our very first arborist that got us going down the right path of planting a diverse forest and making our forest safe and preventative maintenance and some of the basics of what we're still doing today.
You said diverse. I can remember the day when, well, it was before I was here, but the quad was all the same tree. And when elm disease came, all the trees went. And so that was partially because of lack of diversity.
That's right. That's exactly right. In fact, we lost a majority of our trees back in the 50s and 60s due to Dutch elm disease because most of them were the American elm, which made a beautiful canopy over the street.
Yes.
And took very little pruning. So it was a wonderful tree. It was so wonderful, everybody wanted one, and we had too many. And so in the 60s and 70s, what was replacing them was questionable. There were a lot of fast-growing trees that were being put into the streets, and the community was involved with seeing what was taking place. So a group of concerned citizens got together, and they decided that it was time to start looking at what it would take to get some experience and education involved in this tree planting program, or to start a tree planting program at the city, and that kind of morphed into tree care and tree planting program and hiring an expert to do so.
I saw a lot of plantings of locusts because they grow fast.
Right.
And then there was a problem because locusts have seeds, and nobody likes to sit under a tree with all those seeds. So then there was a move to have a locust that didn't have seeds. And so there are all these concerns that we don't know about. And so it was so friendly to have people. So you mentioned the other two arborists that came by.
Bruno Shields was our first. Then we had Bill Kreidenier, who was our second arborist. Jim Sciarra was our third arborist, and now he's the head of the... Bill Kreidenier is actually over at the University of Illinois right now, and I believe he's over the Japan House and those grounds there. And Jim Sciarra is the head of the International Society of Arboriculture, which is our profession. That's the professional industry that trains arborists and provides us the education that we need to do our work.
And I think Croydon was in that one
Yes,
too.
Bill was executive director of that organization before he moved on to the University of Illinois.
Yes, so we have a change in style here. We've gone from board feet to urban arborists, and so Bill was in a arborist, had a headquarters down in Savoy.
That's right.
And we were pushing the prairie. We didn't want the road to expand and take out the prairie on 45 between Windsor Road and Curtis. And Bill was over there, and he helped us to do the prairie. In fact, we take out the trees on the prairie because there were no trees on the prairie until it was drained by the railroads and drained by the farmers. And then the trees come in, and there's sometimes crud trees that grow quickly that we don't really appreciate. And then they shade out the olives shade out the prairie very quickly, and you've lost your ecosystem, which is down to like 1 square mile.
That's I enjoy that stretch of road every time I drive down it.
We have to work to preserve it because it has to be burned every once in a while, and it's very hard to convince city councils to burn because they want to know 3 weeks in advance when you're going to burn. And burns depend on the air. You have to wet your index finger and put it in the air and find out where the wind is coming from and how fast it is.
Sure.
And you can't predict that in sometimes you take a whole crew and you have to disband it because it's not quite the right time. So fire department people usually aren't taught how to burn a meadow. That they have usually been putting out fires, not creating fires. So we're in an educational thing there too. So we last week had a get-together on Saturday just to figure out how we could talk to you. You were very oriented to this tree, and you'd put a demolition white spot on it and a notice, and people had come out of their houses a little bit. There's people that might hug a tree occasionally, and so there were some concerns. So how do we work this? We wanted to be very careful to not be confrontational, but more informational. And I was very pleased. It's probably one of the best city meetings I have been to. In the way it was organized, you had asked your arborist commission to come in to a special meeting to consider the possible demise of an old hickory tree. And
actually a hackberry tree.
Yeah, oh, sorry, yes, a hickory tree. I'm sorry, I know it well. And it's the organization took, after one or two little details, they took comments from the audience, and I thought the comments from the audience were innovative and intellectual, and I didn't hear any wasting of time or repetition. People, if they felt like somebody else had said what, then they didn't have to say it again. Then you presented, and your presentation was very, very good, and we'll go through that a little bit so that you understand it on the air. But and then the public was asked if they had any questions. Having heard all these presentations and your presentation, and I thought that was rather wonderful. And I think that the people, the vote was taken. It was unanimous to take down the tree, and I felt that everyone was with you because you had explained. And I think that was all that was wanted, was the information as to why this tree had reached its age and had to come down. Then the next question was, what do you do with the tree? What do you do with the stump? How do you use the this is an educational device. So tell us a little bit about your experience with this tree, because I think you've been at this tree for a long time.
Sure. I started my career with this tree, if you will. I started with the city in 1985 as a tree climber. We call them arbor technicians. That position is the position that actually climbs through our trees or uses the bucket truck and does the trimming and the cabling and the hands-on caring for the tree's position.
That's a kind of risky job, climbing trees.
It can be dangerous.
And even if you have a bucket up there and your motor and your vehicle goes out, that bucket can fall, and I've known people who have had problems with that.
There's been certainly been some issues in the industry.
So this is a very responsible job, climbing trees.
It is. It was rather difficult when I first started because, quite frankly, and I've not made this little secret of mine public, but I will today, I was afraid of heights. So to climb some of these trees was quite a harrowing experience for me.
This tree is 140 feet high.
It was really up there. Now, it's a beautiful sight. When you're up in a tree like that, looking at the canopy over the community is just awe-inspiring, and it's a wonderful thing.
Yes, we have a bridge over by Danville, which is 160 feet off the ground, and you look down on the trees. So I understand, yes.
Yeah, so, so when I started out with the city, our forestry supervisor at the time, Will Abbott, one of the better things he did for us was, there's a couple of green guys, and I guess the other guy I was working with had a little more experience than I did, but Will got me up in some of the trees in Carl Park, and there's some of our tallest trees in the community.
Lohman, I think, put together a whole lot of different trees in that park.
Yes, it's a very interesting park.
Yes. They're getting to be aged enough that some of them have had to come down, I think.
There has, since my tenure here at the city, there have been a couple of the bigger ones that have come down due to decline. But after climbing big trees like that, it made it a little easier, and I eventually became acclimated with climbing through trees in a rope and saddle, and so it became enjoyable, and it was certainly an adventure every day. But back in '87, I think, this particular hackberry was on our cabling list, and we had certain trees that we would look to put support cables up into to help strengthen their structure. And this tree had such long branches, and the fact that hackberry species are known to break up large branches to break up in wind, we picked a couple of the weaker crotches and we put 2 cables in them.
So when you put a cable in, do you put the cable around the limb, or do you burrow through the limb?
That's a very good question. We put them through the limb. The industry standard is you can either use lags, a lag screw, or bolts are actually preferred, where you go through the entire limb and you put a nut and a washer on the other side. Now, on this one, we used lag screws. Well, there wasn't a lot of bolting back when we were doing it, plus these were large limbs. So we'd take a hand drill up there, one of those hand augers, and we took lots of tools, and what was memorable about it was our bucket truck wouldn't reach high enough. So we had to take all this equipment up into the bucket truck, which is about not quite halfway up into the tree, and we had to climb the rest of the way. So I felt like a real mountaineer, with all this stuff clanging.
And a branch could fall down if you're not careful.
Well, we trimmed it first, so we felt it was fairly safe, but we were up there and we cabled it, and then we had the 1990 ice storm, and I truly think that the 2 cables that we put in that tree held it together better than what it would have had without them, but we did have some damage, and there were a couple large limbs that fell out of that tree, one of which was about a 16-inch log that fell through the roof of the house into the second-story bedroom window. So it was kind of over to the side of the roof where there was not a lot of space between the attic and the second-floor bedroom, but it still went through to the second-floor bedroom. And that was another experience with this tree. We had to get 2 bucket trucks. Well, that whole ice storm was an experience. We were working from St. Valentine's Day. I was just getting around, sitting down with Beth, to have a nice romantic meal. And I got the call, and I don't think I came back for like 4 days, but we were on 12-hour shifts for a solid 2 months, 7 days a week, cleaning up after that storm. It was something.
Something that has been on the radio just recently that says that when older trees have a huge more canopy. You would think an older tree didn't expand, but an older tree apparently has a very large canopy, and that can be very heavy, and it can be a problem in ice storms. You've got more branches than you suspect. The older trees are still alive.
Well, hackberries especially, a lot of the trees that succumb to the ice storm are finely branched. So like a hackberry, elms were another one, where you've got a lot of little branches, little fine branching out on the tips, and that all collected ice and weight. So it tore some major limbs off this tree. And we actually had this tree on the removal list back in 1990 because of that damage. We got the entire town cleaned up, and like we always do, we go back and we take a second look at our removals for a number of reasons. One, we want to be efficient with the tax dollars. So if a tree doesn't have to be removed because it's a more expensive thing to do than pruning, we look to put it on a reinspection list or to repair it if we can. And this one we decided that we could repair it. It was all solid. We cleaned up the wounds as best we could, and we ended up putting 2 more cables in it. And that was later 1990, maybe as late as early 91. So now we've got 4 cables in this tree. And and we cleaned it all out, and so we preserved that tree. It was on the 1990 removal list. So I like to look at it. We preserved it back there in 1990. I think if that tree had been left alone and been out in a field during this 1990 ice storm, that a good portion of it would have fallen apart. And I think it'd be down on the ground and probably dust by now if it wasn't for our urban arboriculture.
Yes, well, I have a list in my mind of trees that are kind of fast-growing trees which urban people tend to plant because they grow quickly. And hackberry is in that category, along with sycamores and a few others. Can you tell us some of the trees that are more in that qualification? And I think cities now are getting rather wary about that, because 50 years later comes through a storm and you can have 30 trees down because they're fast growing, their cells are large, and they're not as strong. Just let us know that hackberries are a part of that.
Oh, they are. They're a native tree to the community, and they just need more attention to make them a strong structured tree for an urban area. But they can certainly fall apart, and do fall apart in storms if they don't have the right attention. Silver maples are another one that they don't fall apart big like hackberries, but they will drop branches in winds, and they can be broken up the tops generally in ice storms.
Some of these trees have junctions where several limbs come out at the same place, which makes it easier for them to fall apart.
Yeah, and that was all a part of our cabling program too. So a tight crotch, what we call a V-shaped crotch, is a weak connection. U-shaped crotches are the stronger connections. So really your wide-angle branches are your stronger branches. And so we would look for trees with those narrow crotches, and we would go around town and we would cable some of the better trees that we could afford to fit into our program to hold them together a little better. And that was what we did with this hackberry back then.
So we're thinking in our minds that this may be a tree that's due to come out anyway.
Well, it certainly, we've been keeping an eye on it. In 1997, when we had an inventory, we had it listed as a Priority 1 prune. And what that means is it had some larger limbs of concern. Now, I can't remember if they were all dead wood or they were cracked or broken, but there was some concern up there with some of its larger branch structure.
We had some person in the committee that was there when after you'd put a white mark on it, and after you'd put a notice on it, and after Stephen Wald and others had gotten interested in whether this should come down, she had been there when you were making an extra look at this tree with a bucket and a camera.
That's right.
And the camera was very good because it showed rot and it showed breakage. And we didn't necessarily have a core. Nobody had cored this tree, I don't think, to get the see what the.
That's right. We did not.
Qualities. So, so keep going and tell us a little bit more about what you were doing there. But we did have people on our little meeting. There was probably about 8 people there. So they were sympathetic with what you were doing, and you were sympathetic with what they were thinking, and you brought together this meeting.
It was a very interesting process, and it was our first in posting a pending removal. Now, I knew what I know from my experience at the city of Urbana. There's no question in my mind that the time had come with this tree. In fact, we think it's 150 to 200 years old, and we look in our Michael Durr's book, who lists a description of all the Midwestern trees, and he actually states that hackberries can live as long as 150 to 200 years old. In fact, he knew some that were about that age and in a natural area. But any hackberry that can live that long in an urban area is somewhat unique.
If you go to Brownfield Woods or Treeless Woods, the big grove, the trees aren't deeply rooted. They're dependent on each other. They're friends and relatives. So if you have a tornado coming through, it's a matter of this forest saving itself rather than individual trees. When you go to an urban situation, you've got an individual tree. And there was a little creek there, and this is old enough that it probably predated urbanization of that site. So it probably had its friends and relatives in its day. I looked at a little booklet that was dealing with a hickory, and Chief Sumaga was and I just incorrectly said hickory, but Chief Sumaga felt like he was born under a hickory tree. And so you're thinking perhaps 10 or 15 different species of trees nestled together so the wind doesn't get in. When they do come down, they often have roots that are shallow. And so keep going without me interrupting.
Okay, so we were looking at this tree. It looks, as you drive by it and see it from the street, it looks healthy. Now, with
25-foot straight pipe.
Right. It looks healthy. In the summer, it was leafed out. You know, it's not your typical dieback. The tree doesn't look unhealthy. Now, with a trained eye, they train us in arboriculture to look for hazards. That's one of the major components of our program to make our forests safe for people to live and work under. So we're looking for these kinds of things, and our experience with hackberries specifically and wounds and decay can guide us on what we can do with the tree. I thought, you know, one of the things, well, why I went up into the tree with the bucket truck, getting back at that, was I'm concerned about this tree, and I'm concerned about it holding together, and we have a very advanced cabling system up there of 4 cables kind of holding this canopy together. So if you can all envision how a tree would move when it's held together, it's very interesting. A tree moves in a certain way, and that's how it gains its strength in the trunk. And it will grow cell strength and wood strength according to how it moves. So this tree's been moving this certain way with this cabling structure for 27 years. So as I looked to repair this tree, the one limb that I was very concerned about over the house, I couldn't see any way of not getting around taking it off, but it had 3 cables in it. So 75% of that cabling system was attached to that limb, and my initial concern was, how will that tree move once we take this cabling system out? It'll move differently, and so it raises the potential of failure. So that was one thing. We get into a blizzard situation. Of course, I could see components in the upper portion of the tree, and some of the knowledge I had from inspecting it back in '97 and more recently, I was concerned with the movement up there and the cables being held in place with the hollows that we had in the upper portion of the canopy. So we had this blizzard. After I had decided to postpone the removal or put it on hold shortly, and I'll get into that a little bit because that was unique as well, we had this blizzard. And, I thought, okay, Murphy's Law, and I apologize for all the people called last name Murphy out there, but, wouldn't you know it? I make a decision like this and we get a wind, and it scared me. So I thought about that, and I thought about that whole weekend that wind was coming in. And the next week I went up in a bucket truck to examine the tree. And I don't know if, and I found a major failure in the branch structure up there on a limb that was about 16 to 18 inches in diameter, and it was cracked. So that limb had failed, and it was ready to fall, and it's being held by a cable. So I took pictures of that, and I took pictures of the rot that was down below, which are in critical branch juncture areas that I thought this would be a good opportunity at our presentation to show the people what I'm talking about with this tree.
Yes, and it was very good. I have one aside there, that when you show pictures, I would really like the administration to turn the lights right off so we see your pictures
That's
well.
A very good point.
And also, I was thinking that the modification of the presentation area, all those people sit in rows. And this was more a situation where you would have people around a table. So sometimes the organization of your city council is interesting. It facilitates this sort of back and forth that I was looking for. And I find out that those chairs can actually be moved for voting procedures. They take them out of the room. They're very, very heavy. But I did talk to the mayor a little bit and suggest that sometimes we need a meeting with a round table. And indeed, that was what you were turning around to the audience. Actually, they have a video camera that takes a photograph of you looking at the council group. So the community is fortunate to have that visual. It's very hard to figure out how to do this. But
it was of course it was our first, and we stuck with the standard setup. But I would have been a lot more comfortable if I could have turned around and talked to the audience. And I think when we do this again, not if, but when we do this again, I might sit up there with the tree commission, and we could be almost in a round kind of configuration where we're looking back and forth and discussing.
Some councils do that. And have their administrative staff facing the audience.
Mm-hmm.
There was another thing that's very pleasing in this situation, was that you can have a council meeting where you present your public case early in the program or late in the program. If you're early, you don't know what's going to be talked about, and if you're late, it's a fait accompli that the topic has already been discussed. So in this case, there was this back and forth, which I thought was rather nice.
It was a 6 one way, half a dozen another. So we thought it was important for us to hear public input. So I had the opportunity to answer any of those concerns in my presentation. But on the other hand, we thought the public may have questions about some of the presentation that I made. So we actually gave them an opportunity to speak before and after my presentation of my concerns about the tree.
Yes, and laptops and computers helped quite a bit.
Yeah, technology is wonderful to help present pictures. The idea with us having the tree posted as a pending removal, we had thought about something like this in our legacy tree program. And the idea behind it was, and we put a lot of thought into this, creating this legacy tree program, and we wanted the public to be a part of it. In fact, the major component of our legacy tree program is to promote tree health and tree care. Well, we can do that on public trees. We have a program to do that. We can always do better, and we need to do more of that. But how can we approach that with private trees? So one component of the Legacy Tree Program is to acknowledge not just public trees, but to also acknowledge private trees. And we want to teach as a part of this program what those trees, what our significant trees of the community need to help have them live a long life. One of the components of that program was if a tree, once it was designated a legacy tree, was requested to be removed. Now this is all a voluntary program, and it was on private property. The property owner had the right to remove that tree, but we just asked them to go through the process of posting it and having public discussion on it first. So here we are. We'd all figured this out. The Legacy Tree Program is passed, and I'm doing our tree inventory, and I'm assessing tree removals, and I'm marking trees throughout the community that needed to be marked and removed. And I had not thought once about posting this tree, which I knew was one of our largest trees in the community, so the neighbors would realize it was coming down. A citizen, Stephen Wald, suggested that, and a light came on, and I said, and told myself, we've been thinking about this for a good 4 or 5 years now. Yes, this is a perfect opportunity to let the people tell us what they feel about this tree and be involved with its decision.
It got into News Gazette, and it got into and contribution to WEFT. WEFT recorded some of the discussions, and they went up on television, and they could be streamed at the time of broadcast, or whether it was through WEFT or through the Urbana Public Television. But then it went up onto YouTube, so you could get it any time at convenience. And so, yes, part of WEF's community involvement was a positive part here. And so let me ask you an awkward question. Sometimes it's better to not say anything and take the tree down before anyone realizes it. Have you been in that situation? And tell us why you might do that, because there's some liability or things like that you have to be concerned about.
Well, I've been caught in a situation where I wish I would have stepped back and provided more information to adjoining residents. And one example was there was a silver maple. It was a fairly big silver maple that was growing over a particular manhole. It wasn't a great tree. It wasn't in dire condition, but it wasn't a great tree. And it's growing over this manhole, and it's causing thousands of dollars worth of damage to storm line access.
Oh, like willows can get their roots in it.
Yeah, and this one was actually growing over into it, and it was crushing the access. So our operations supervisor at the time came to me and showed me the problem, said this is a real issue. We've got to, repair this, but we won't be able to do it without doing major damage to the root system of this tree. In fact, we got to carve part of the trunk away from this manhole. So I said, well, let's see how the neighbor feels about it, the adjacent homeowner. And so I went and talked to what I felt was the adjacent homeowner at the time, and he was tickled pink. We're going to take that tree down, and can you put something better in for us? So we had it all figured out. We're going to take the tree down, plant him a new tree, and Rich can replace this manhole and repair it, and everything was feeling pretty good. Well, we take the tree down, and we had a really mad neighbor that was just on the other side of the line. And I look at that tree, he goes, that's not his tree, that's my tree. And so, it would have been better if we would have informed both adjacent homeowners, and I would have talked to this gentleman, and I think he would have understood. In fact, he says, I understand why you did what you did. I just didn't like how you went about it. I didn't know anything about it.
But I think sometimes it's more operable to remove the tree without.
Well, there is a clause in our ordinance that allows me to make a decision and act on it immediately, even if it's on private property, and that's an imminent hazard. So if a tree is an imminent hazard to the public and it's going to harm someone or do some substantial property damage, then whether it's on private property or public property, by ordinance we can go in and take it down.
I was interested that there were some people from Champaign there. And Champaign has its trees. I went over to the Prospect and University. There's a nice little park with an Osage orange tree.
I love that tree.
And it's different tree. It doesn't have a tall trunk, and it flops down into the ground.
Yes.
And even roots in some cases where it's dropped down. But there's lots of repair on that tree. And you see that the cut-off branch is covering over. And can you tell people a little bit about how a tree operates? And a young tree is probably different from an older tree. They were asking questions about sprouts. And sprouts aren't very good that come from a stump. But you're also thinking about propagating this tree so that you would have the same gene pool.
Yes, well, I mean, many ideas came at us at this meeting, and in fact, the mayor is the one that brought the propagation idea to me, and she's had that one before on some of the important trees of the community to propagate them and spread them around the community. But the unusual part of this, and of course, posting this pending removal really got the feedback going, and I appreciate Steve and Dennis really getting people involved in this. We've got a lot of people that love trees in our community. So I felt the pressure. And of course, all of these people were opposed to what I thought we needed to do. So that was, a little stressful, if you will, to weather that storm. But I thought it was very useful because it really got people together on this thing, and everybody thought it was a healthy tree. So the other thing I did in my inventory or in my presentation was I presented why the tree was healthy but yet not safe. And the interesting thing about trees is that the life support system on a tree is in the outer parts of the branches and the trunk and the roots. So that phloem area, that inside of the bark, the cambium's the growth part of the tree. The phloem is the transport part of the tree, and the sapwood, it transports the water. That's all on the outer portion of these branches and trunks. Right. But the strength is the wood, and that's your xylem, and your sapwood grows into your xylem. So you've got your heartwood and your sapwood are making the structure of this tree and provided its strength. So when you have hollows, you are concerned that the tree has the appropriate structural integrity to still stand. And when we see trees fail and stuff, if you look at a limb that comes off here, or you look at a limb that comes off there, I would say the majority of time you're going to see some kind of rot and decay in that attachment area. So this tree had hollows all throughout the entire tree, the branch structure, and then these attachment areas were a huge concern with the decay in the hollows that were close to them. And so I presented that in a picture.
Yes, those pictures were essential, and we'll drop a few pictures in too. You have a thumb that you brought that will make us that opportunity. In here, we want to extend this to other situations. Sometimes it will be younger trees that we need to remove just to preserve the prairie, for instance. So as you come to us from an era when people were taking out forests, I mean, all around Chicago and Michigan and whatnot was forest at one stage, and all the houses were frame houses with wood, and that's why it was the Chicago fire. And the same with Champaign, it had big fires. We don't have that wood anymore. So as a forester, how are you changing dimensions, and how do you educate? How do you work with the contractor that's taking down the tree? How do you take a piece of wood that's big enough to show rings? And you mentioned things like the cost of dunking that material in a solvent so that it wouldn't split and break and be destroyed. Where does it go? Do we need a service center? Do we have a university that has something like the Pollinator Museum? Say something about the next step, because the next step was
It was exciting, wasn't it?
how do we take this how do we use this as an educational advice? Could we put some little pergolas up there nearby that could be slid away so the contractor could work, so that people will understand what's going on?
Well, there's in this short amount of time with this group that is interested in the tree, a lot of ideas on how to memorialize this tree have come out, and they're still, they're still coming out. And some of the ones that I've heard is trying to preserve the branch tips. And I don't know if there's bronzing anymore, but somebody mentioned bronzing the branch tips for wall hangings, casting the portions of the trunk, making a seat out of the stump, leaving the trunk so it can be, people can take pictures of it, so we can create a little landscape around it. People can see the massive size of it. I've even contacted Taylor Studios out of Rantoul.
Oh, yes.
Just to see if they, to help have them give us some ideas of how they could memorialize this tree section. And of course, they make tree trunks for Amanita Purvis and museums, and they may be able to cast some of this, so that's an idea.
The tree leaves decay, so they have to have mechanisms for making artificial leaves.
Right.
So it's a very big studio, and they do things like museum dioramas, and
They do some phenomenal things.
So we have 30,000 students over there, I think it might be more, that are looking at an era when they're going to have less than what their grandmothers had or their grandparents had, and they want to save things. So where do you put some of this history? Where do we see your argument? You have tree parades. You can go from one tree to another tree to another tree. And we're thinking of doing that with a little device on your bicycle front, so that you can come to a site and read it. So you have opportunities. What's our next goal, and do we keep these people together?
Oh, certainly.
And do they provide some funding by giving chips of wood to people for $1?
Most certainly. I think this is the beginning stages of at the very least, having people more involved in our tree commission meetings, specifically here in the immediate future on our legacy tree program. We passed this ordinance with the idea that we would initially try to fund the program through private donations to see if we couldn't have it be self-supportive.
I think it's possible.
Yeah, I think so too. We've done a lot of our educational publications with private donations. Or Under the Canopy, for example, that became a statewide publication, was totally funded through private corporations and citizens. So I think we've got a good opportunity here. We have people that are very interested in memorializing this tree. Say we have an artist, and this is not limiting any of the artists out there with just this idea, but we have them do a pencil drawing of this tree before we take it down. We could have that as a memorialized wall hanging for, we could replicate that and sell those for funding.
A T-shirt.
A T-shirt.
With a stump on the back and a real tree on the front, or something like that.
Sure. And even beyond this tree, we can get memberships into the Legacy Tree Program, if you will, where people are providing us funding, like they do much for the Arbor Day Foundation, except in a local fashion. And this money can go towards recognizing our significant trees of the community.
I'm looking at the clock. We have about 8 minutes. I want to say, where do you find the font of energy for this sort of discussion at the national level or at an international level? Do you have a society that is interested in urban trees, those poor trees that are sitting out there with no protection from others from the wind?
There's a number of different societies out there that are interested in trees, and certainly the National Arbor Day Foundation has been very supportive of us. They're the ones that manage and organize and initiated the Tree City USA program. So they're huge. Locally, we're lucky enough to have the International Society of Arboriculture right here in Champaign-Urbana. That's a worldwide organization, and that organization trains tree professionals in arboriculture. So those are the guys that are professional tree carers, caregivers,
Whether
I guess,
they're
if you
urban
will.
or whether they're forest.
Well, mostly arboriculture is urban. That's not your traditional timber management. The arboriculture guys are the ones that are keeping these trees living entities, mostly in urban areas.
So how do you deal with the tree huggers that are in the Amazon?
Well,
or in Indonesia or other countries that are removing forests at such a rapid rate?
I think the way we compare with the forest's demise throughout the international world is to understand that some of the new forests that are replacing that are urban forests. And urban forests are a key green area of the future. And yes, we have to stop cutting down rainforests and try to replenish our rainforest area. But another avenue that is fast becoming very important is the urban forest.
Wow.
And you know, I want to say one thing. I think trees in a community, if you will, are what support the police and the fire and the major necessities of a city. And how is that? Well, it is because trees and the environment and green space draw people.
Well, it also draws the wildlife. So the hawks and the sparrows and
It's all interplaying, isn't
and the
it?
squirrels that are brought in sometimes to educate students to appreciate a wild animal and how they should care for it.
Well, who wouldn't want to live in a community that's very well integrated? And when a community draws people, it draws business, and both of those draw tax dollars, and that's what a community needs to support itself.
And there are certain rules of the game that you have to. We had some people speaking about the power companies coming through and cutting through a tree, and we had a whole event at north of Champaign where Ameren wanted to renew its power lines. Sometimes when you have old power lines, they lean down and short trees out. So please don't plant a mature tree underneath a
In a utility easement, it really.
utility easement.
Yeah.
And if possible, don't put your house 2 inches away from what might be an interesting tree. So the public needs to know why you have some strange trees that are all one direction, because
Well, there's a necessity when trees are close to power lines, and you know there's some unfortunate things that happen with trees and power lines when they're close to each other, and we're continually working as communities, Champaign and Urbana, to try to manage that so it doesn't become overzealous pruning. I think Ameren does work well with us, and they certainly help us to negate hazards that are near their power lines. But we, you know, it's a tough situation of having trees near utilities, and the simple fact of the matter is they can't cohabitate very well unless the trees are cleared sufficiently from the lines.
yes, we also want to work with engineers who often want to clear a whole area and replant it, whereas taking care of the trees that are already there and maybe 100 years old. We bought a prairie between Seymour and White Heath, and it recently was herbicided. So our purchase, mainly for prairie, has been decimated by a cocktail of herbicide that's
Goodness.
designed to remove trees. And you have to approach engineers and say, well, you want the electricity, but we had removed all the trees. And so I'm worried about the blanket use of herbicides worldwide, because often on railroad corridors especially, that's the only place where we have original remnant ecosystems.
Well, even with development, even outside of herbicides, it's easier just to get rid of a tree than to build around it. You know, and that's one of the components of our legacy tree program, is to designate our significant trees of the community with the hopes that we'll all recognize these important trees, and when we come upon them with development and things of that nature, that we'll work harder to salvage them rather than just move them out of the way.
Yes. Well, we're 1 minute. So how do you organize this little group of people that were together the other night? How do you have a subcommittee of the Arborist Division. How do we encourage these people to think about what happens to the stump? How do we continue this?
We keep communicating with them. I've got hundreds of emails, it feels like at least, and I intend to keep communicating with them and organize another meeting to work out this memorial. And I think from there, we can go from there, and we will gain more membership, as what I hope, from these core people that were involved with this particular event.
And how do you interact with the university with this? Does the university regard forestry as sort of more applied, and so a job for Parkland rather than for the university?
Well, the university has its arboriculture as well on its grounds, and I think a good portion, well, I know a good portion of our tree commission is made up of past and present university professors, so we have a good tie there.
What about training, though? What about the university as a trainer of arborists?
Okay, university is training of arborists. There are certain schools in the country that do train urban foresters. Western Illinois University is one of them. There are some similar traits between traditional forestry and urban forestry, so I think some of that is done here at the University of Illinois. But there are specific schools that have focused on urban forestry as a specialty that they educate on.
Well, Mike Brooks, thank you for coming in. Thank you for what you do, and continue your work. And we hope we can support you in any way possible.
Thanks for having me on.
Very good.